was added in the later acts that was passed in during the British era or during the Crown rule, you could say. And then finally, what you saw was you had a concept that largely emerged, especially in the provinces during the British era, where you had a governor, his executive council, but you also had provincial legislative assemblies. That was basically given to you. तो गवर्नर साहब थे प्लस उनकी काउंसिल भी थी और उसके साथ साथ प्रोविंशियल लेजिस्लेटिव असेंबलीज दे वर आल्सो क्रिएटेड। ये जो मैं लिख रहा हूँ ये सारी बात ये आपको लॉज के माध्यम से कैप्चर होनी चाहिए। यू शुड बी नोइंग दैट हाउ दीज बेसिक इवोल्यूशन हैड टेकन प्लेस over the years by different laws which were framed during the period of the British Raj. Not all of them are necessary, but if you just go through some of the previous year's questions, you might see or you might end up getting a question from this part, which would be very easy to then resolve or solve if you have just gone through these particular acts, maybe the charter ones or maybe the Government of India acts. Either of them. So all these acts are necessary. And once you see all these acts are basically created, and these acts generally they are actually creating this sort of institution. So this is how institutionally we were evolving. This was largely the structural evolution through the Government of India Act or through the Charter Acts over the years in the constitutional making process or in the development of the constitution. उसके बाद फिर अंत में क्या होता है हमारे पास गवर्नर जनरल फिर भी रहते हैं इसको और यहाँ बन जाते हैं हमारे पास एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली। ठीक है, फाइनली यहाँ तक हम पहुंचते हैं व्हेन यू आर लुकिंग एट पार्टीशन ये यहाँ तक और व्हेन वी हैव यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया तो अब हमारे पास क्या है, व्हाट इज द स्ट्रक्चर वी हैव अब हमारे पास कैसा स्ट्रक्चर बन गया आफ्टर द कंट्री हैज वॉन इंडिपेंडेंस वी हैव फ्रेम्ड आवर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन। तो फाइनली जो यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया स्ट्रक्चरली बना तो व्हाट इज दिस यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया, वी हैव अ प्रेसिडेंट, वी हैव अ लोकसभा, वी हैव अ राज्यसभा, इन द स्टेट वी हैव अ गवर्नर, वी हैव अ स्टेट लेजिस्लेटिव असेंबली एंड इन सम स्टेट्स लाइक 6 states we have state legislative council as well, only in 6 states. So this is the structure we get from the very first part. तो पहले तो इसको प्रिपेयर करना है हमें, बट क्योंकि ये बहुत इंफॉर्मेटिव है तो आई डोंट हैव मच टू ऑफर हियर, आई डोंट हैव मच टू डिस्कस हियर। सो आई विल मूव टू द नेक्स्ट पार्ट व्हिच इज बेसिकली ऑन क्वेश्चंस व्हिच इज आस्क्ड फ्रॉम टेरिटरी एंड सिटीजनशिप। तो टेरिटरी और सिटीजनशिप से संबंधित सवाल। तो टेरिटरी के कॉन्सेप्ट में थोड़ा सा मैं कोशिश करूंगा कि I'll be able to deal with some of the concepts with regards to the territory, union and its territory. That's what it is called in part 1 of the Constitution.
So many documents, spreadsheets, videos to go through, and the deadline is tomorrow. All the trainings are...
Union and its territory. That's what it is called in part 1 of the Constitution. So this is the structure you have understood. So you have to follow this structure. You have to basically know that what was the composition of this, how did this and this change, which act basically made provisions for this, then how this also emerged. So acts made provisions for all this. Then finally we have come to this point where the partition was accepted and we were granted permission to convene a constituent assembly, and the constituent assembly was convened to draft our constitution. When we had drafted the constitution, this is the structure that we get, which we know as Union of India. So this is Union of India, and structurally we represent it, through institutionally we represent this as the union structure and this as the provincial structure or the regional structure or the state structure. Okay. So now we have to focus on very precisely on the next part, that is, here I will discuss a bit about territory. While we focusing on the concept of territory, union and its territory, so I will focus more on territory. So how do you see this territory? What articles of the Constitution governs the territorial composition of India? And you will find that basically it is the first part of the Constitution, the Article 1 of the Constitution. So Article 1 is more about the nomenclature. So the state having two names, India, that is Bharat, and then showing its nature or characteristic. So what is the nature of this territory or what is the nature of this state? It's a union of state. Okay. So union of state concept simply means when you use the expression union of state, just conceptually you have to learn or you have to understand that this is a model which has been kept in our constitution after so much of discussion and debate or deliberation. Why? So the first point is that India, although have a structure which is a federal structure, meaning our structure, which means we fulfill all the structures which are federal in nature. So we have a federal structure also. Why? Because there is division of power, there is a center, there is a state, there is an independent judiciary. Now these are the characteristics, these are the traits of a federation. Okay? But why did we not call ourselves a federation? Because if you look at the word federation, this federation is derived from the word fidus, and fidus means agreement, or you can say a treaty. Now it would simply mean that federation is that nation or that state which has evolved out of a treaty or an agreement. Therefore, because India's existence did not emerge out of a treaty or an agreement, we should know this, that India's emergence as a nation was not because India was a product of a treaty or an agreement. As a nation, we are an old nation. The identity of the nation or the identity of the idea of an Indian state is very old. So, therefore, our constitution makers decided that we should use this model. We should use this expression to understand about the Indian state. So we call ourselves union of state. Union of state simply means that when there is normal times in the country, what we do, we behave like a फेडरेशन. हम एक राष्ट्र के तौर पर कैसे काम करते हैं? एक फेडरेशन के तौर पे काम करते हैं. मतलब सेंटर इज इक्वल टू स्टेट. Because in federation, it's not as if that center is more powerful or center has more powers than the state. Here, center and state both are equally powerful. In some matters, the state is actually given more protection. That's how the federation operates. So that's how the idea of federation or federalism operates. Now, if you look at the other context, if there is emergency situation, that is in situations of emergency, how do we behave? We behave like a unitary state, So, suppose we can say that we transform into a unitary state. Unitary state would mean that here the center has more power than the state. That is why to capture these two very unique essence, we call ourselves a union of state. So that's how we understand or we derive the concept of union of state, and we do not or we just stopped ourselves from calling India a federal state or India a federation. We basically call ourselves a union of state because that's a very unique structure that the Indian Constitution had designed, and that was the structure through which Indian Constitution has operated. So we wanted to ensure that we wanted to not be identified as a nation which is emerged out of a treaty or an agreement. We also wanted to ensure that our unique system should be reflected in the Constitution, and that's why we had a word which we chose, that was union of state. Okay? So, Article 1 says these two things, India, that is Bharat, because again the debate was what should be India's name? Should we name it India or should we name it Bharat? People said, why India? India is basically a word that would show the legacy of India being a colony. So India is a word that is attached with colonial legacy. So we should actually move away from it and not use it because we are now free, or we should keep using it because that's how the world recognizes us. So ultimately the Constitution had a consensus. They said that we'll keep two names together. Bharat denotes the legacy of India. It's an old name. And India basically is a name through which India is primarily known around the world. So we kept both the names. That's why Article 1 primarily talks about these things. What is India? India, that is Bharat, is a union of state. plus territories क्या होंगी? What would be the territory of India? तो territory भारत का क्या होगा? तो territory of, you can say state की territory, क्योंकि अभी जो आइडेंटिफिकेशन है हमारी कैसी है? स्टेट के तौर पे टेरिटरी आइडेंटिफाइड है, यानी सारी टेरिटरीज किसकी है? अलग अलग राज्य की है ना? We have so many states in our country, so all the territories of all the states that will constitute territory of India, plus whatever territory is basically held by the union territories we can say. Plus in future, ये गुंजाइश भी हमने छोड़ दिया, any occupied territory. So if we occupy any territory, that would also be clubbed as the territory of India. So that's basically Article 1 for you. Okay. Article 2 is this simplistic article which says that the Indian Parliament can add by a law any new territory in India. Okay. So which means here Article 2 has an external dimension. Article 2 allows the Parliament to add any external territory into India. Okay. In the classes I've already said many times that Article 2 is actually a non-used article in the Constitution. Because you just have to remember one thing, whenever there is an external dimension attached, you have to pass a constitutional amendment. That's why you would see that if Goa was included in India, the Constitution had to be amended. If Bangladesh land, like after the BLA agreement with Bangladesh, the land that came to India, it has to be added by a constitutional amendment. If you have to give any land to any outside nation, again you have to amend the constitution. Berubari case, if you remember, that's where this idea is very clear. So as a formula, you have to remember one thing, and whenever there is any external dimension, which means you are giving your land to any country which is outside India, or you are bringing any land from outside India to India, then the constitution has to be amended. Okay, that's the point. Although Article 2 says not necessary. Article 2 says that you can do this, that is, if there is a land which is to be brought into India from outside, then it can be done even by a simple majority, by a law made by the Parliament. That's what Article 2 says. But we should say that despite this provision of the Constitution, land which has been brought into India from any external source, for all of them, we have amended our Constitution. And amendment is basically, when I say amendment, I mean that I have amended the Constitution by special majority. Although the word amendment might be used over there also, but it will not be considered as amendment as the article says. But when I am saying the word amendment from external dimension, then what I mean is that we are amending the Constitution by special majority. ठीक है? तो हमने स्पेशल मेजॉरिटी से ही अपने देश में कोई ऐसा भूभाग शामिल किया है. That is what the message that we get in Article 2. Not very important, not very necessary. The necessary article actually is Article 3 of the Constitution. Because Article 3 talks about reorganization. What type